Hey everybody, it's Christine and welcome back to my third installment of Electrobiology. Thanks for joining me. The series was inspired by my daughter's Halloween costume, but anyway, she decided to be a dinosaur instead of a fairy princess, but I still will try to get to that magic wand. I promise you, even though it's going to take like a few more series in this. So anyway, for the rest of the title, the myth as relating to the symbolism, and magic with the K is relating to more of the power of transformation instead of the magic with the C that is relating more towards sleight of hand and deception. Also, I do have a disclaimer. I don't have anything about or against quantum or relativity. I just don't understand some of that stuff. Me personally, I'm not a theoretical mathematician. That stuff is way beyond me. It takes a lifetime of skill to develop that, and I'm just not there. And also, too, you have to pick your battles on what you want to concentrate on. For me, I rather do patterns and biology instead of concentrating on math. I only have 2 hours after everybody goes to bed for self-time and study. So anyway, that's that. So anyway, if you're ready, sit back, relax, take your troubles to the door, and let's do some science and biology theory together. All right, let's go. Today, let's start with taking a step back into history with a man named Vitruvius. So, who was he anyway? Well, on the surface, he was an architect, but he was so much more. There's only a little bit left in his writings, but from what we know of him, of course, he was an architect, but he believed that you needed to be at least knowledgeable in many fields. So, what was some of his other passions? Well, mathematics, music, astronomy, some of the arts of warfare, like fortifications and war machines and ballistics. You know, when I was in school, I had never even heard of this guy, especially when it came to biology. But now and then you will hear about him, especially most people like me. I came to know him through Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. So with that, let's explore some of these concepts from architecture to and in relationship to biology. Vitruvius, in my eyes, is a pure genius as far as his working knowledge of proportions of circles and squares in the 2D, and if you're talking about 3D, it's spheres and cubes. Although he doesn't necessarily mention his work with cardioids, but through his work in amphitheaters, that is expressed. And what is a cardioid? Well, a cardioid is basically a circle encircling a circle. Vitruvius, he mentions many people in his work, but two people that stood out to me was one, Pythagoras. Now, you might know him as for the Pythagorean theorem, which is basically squaring the triangle. And by the way, if you double that and then square that, you get the cube that we talked about in the previous page. But Pythagoras, the father of mathematics, and then another person that he does mention is Apollonius of Perga. Now, he has work in the conical sections here, which you can see. They almost look like upside down ice cream cones. But he wasn't the first one to work with these concepts. He just had profound work in it, that's all. And then this diagram has to do with the frequencies to sound and the proportions to it and the golden ratio, which there's a short video. Actually, it's made by Disney and I think it's quite good. So I'm going to insert it there because I think they can explain things much, much better than I can.
The father of mathematics and music.
Mathematics and music?
Ah, you'll find mathematics in the darndest places. Watch. First, we'll need a string. Stretch it good and tight. Plunk it. Now divide in half. Plunk again. You see? It's the same tone, one octave higher. Now divide the next section. And the next. Pythagoras discovered the octave had a ratio of 2 to 1. With simple fractions, he got this. And from this harmony in numbers developed the musical scale of today. It was our old friend Pythagoras who discovered that the pentagram was full of Mathmagic. The two shorter lines combined exactly equal the third. And this line shows the magic proportions of the famous golden section. The second and third lines exactly equal the fourth. Once again, we have the golden section. But this is only the beginning. Hidden within the pentagram is a secret for creating a golden rectangle, which the Greeks admired for its beautiful proportions and magic qualities. It's a most remarkable shape. It can mathematically reproduce itself indefinitely. All these rectangles have exactly the same proportions. This figure also contains a magic spiral that repeats the proportions of the golden section into infinity. To the Greeks, the golden rectangle represented a mathematical law of beauty. We find it in their classical architecture. These same golden proportions are also found in their sculpture. The circle has been the basis for many of man's important inventions. The mind can create the most amazing things. If we spin the triangle, we have a
Cone.
Slice the cone. The cone is full of useful mathematical shapes. Slice it again. Slice it several times. The orbits of all planets and satellites can be found in the cone. No matter how you slice it, it's always mathematics.
Hope you like that visit to Mathematics Land, because it leads into this beautiful pattern in the middle of the sunflower. Now, this is pretty impressive, but the real sunflowers are just amazing and more complicated than this. So let's get started with some wheel and spoke patterns. So now that we're familiar with the swirl pattern from the result of the Fibonacci sequence, the proportional squares, let's move that into a circle. So now here is our first dynamic here, and let's see if I can get that straight into the camera. So anyway, the pressure is equalized. You can see the two swirls just being flipped over. They are actually rotating in the same direction. So now on, we're going to remove this little frill part here, and we're just going to take these spoke parts. So now we're going to double that, and we get a swastika pattern with that swirl. But if you're going to take it more linear, we're going to get a cross pattern. Let's double this again. So now we have an 8-pointed star, or you could say that it's more of like a traditional wheel pattern. But it's important to note that all of the pressures are equalized no matter where you go. But in nature, it's going to tend to follow the adding or the stacking of inertia. And that's what all these are representing. Let's stick with the 8-point pattern just because I feel like it's easier, and it's easier to break down because it's going to start from that 3-point pattern, progress to the 5, and go to the 8, which also the 8 can be broken up into the 4s. So, but as in that circular pattern, if you get into the multiples of 3, then you're going to start stacking. Continuing with the 8-pointed star, so as we were showing, this one happens to be in the counterclockwise fashion, but it can also rotate in the clockwise fashion as well. And then on top of that, you can also combine these wheel or star patterns. So what you're going to get is you're going to get this flower pattern or the Dreamcatcher pattern. And that is exactly what you see, very, very simplified from the sunflower. So the sunflower is just that many times multiplied, let's say. All right, so now we have the 8-pointed star. We're going to back up and we're going to break this up into the 3-pointed star, just how we were doing right here. So now we're going to take that and we're going to divide it up into 3 so they are equalized in 2/3. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a picture just like that. So we're going to convert that from 8 to 3, and as you can see there, we're going to repeat the Fibonacci pattern. So here you go. This is going to be half of this. So these two portions are going to be equal to this. Now let's call back to Vitruvius and Pythagoras. Now they had lots and lots of dealings with the golden ratio here. So, and the harmonies and the proportions to it. So you see that exactly like that. So now we're going into harmonics. So now that we know that this is going to be half of this, this is going to be 1 octave, the small part, higher than this. And this is going to be half of the whole, as you can see there. So remember, this is 1 octave higher than this in the same tone. So now we're getting into shells. So now if we just remove the star pattern, we get shell patterns. So now this one, the middle, is going to be the first harmonic, or 2 times the frequency of this outer shell. And same thing with this. So this is going to be half the frequency of this. So now what does this mean now that we have the relationship between the first shell and the second shell? Well, in the very first video, I had mentioned the atom. So now you understand that the harmonics between all of the shells. So now you know that there's going to be more pressure to be pushed out into the outer shells. So what does that mean? That means that these are pressure zones. This relationship between the shells and or star patterns have been described in many ways. So namely Vitruvius, Pythagoras, but also on the myth side like Joseph Campbell, more modern scientists like Walter Russell, historians or alternative historians, I'll say, like Michelle Gibson, and I think a few more. But anyway, they describe this relationship as harmonics. And there's an odd man out, which is Charles Proteus Steinmetz, and he is the father of electrical engineering, and he's the odd one out, and he calls this relationship overtones. So you might ask, well, where are these patterns? The truth is, they're everywhere. So there's things like, you can see them in the first and second harmonics and many more, in galaxies. You can see the pressure points in snowflakes, flowers. They're basically cymatic patterns. Alright, so let's get some symbolism out of the way and use part of it as a working concept. So for the rest of this video series, I just want you to keep that thing in the back of your mind. So as we did before, we explored the relationship between the harmonics and the proportions between a system. So now all these are not going to be any different. So these are going to have all proportionality and harmonics between them. So in this case of the two, as in the first video, this was becoming the symbol of the yin and yang with the equal but opposite forces. These are equalized. And then when we doubled it, we got the swastika pattern. But going back to this one, it's going to go into one of the world's oldest ideas, which is the idea of the universal harmony of opposites. So when you think of that, it's also going to apply to this. So don't necessarily take in all the propaganda and the negative meanings about this. The symbol has been used all around the world. It's also been used to sign peace agreements. So in my mind, I believe it's going to be more in the lines of universal harmony. Okay, with that being said, just in the future, just keep in mind that everything is going to be harmonious in the realm of opposites. Okay. Now, let's go back to this page and the flower or the Dreamcatcher pattern. Now, we already know what that's about, and I have transferred this onto a coffee filter. So here are my high-tech equipment here. So here's my coffee filter with my 8-pointed star, and I just have a kitchen bowl here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover it, and then we are going to start with domes. Alright, so I'm just going to put this all over here. And so what you can see as the swirl patterns, they're going up and into the center. But in the meantime, as they are doing this, they are forming these diamond shapes. And you can see they're progressively getting smaller and smaller and smaller, also getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which is also the golden ratio. Now, let's switch to another architect. So let's move from our coffee filter pattern to a diagram from Philippe Brunelleschi. So now who was he? He was an architect from the Renaissance period, and he had some famous buildings with domes in it. So here's some of his construction. So in these, just like in the coffee filter, we have lines that represent counterclockwise and the clockwise motions of inertia. But what actually happens here is, say if we take one of these lines, we're just going to match it up to one of these lines in the back, and what actually happens is this is going to swirl up and in, which makes these opposite lines, they make these into double helixes. They're going to add into the support of the structure. Now let's explain some of what's going on in the gray areas in between the purple diamond. So now in this gray area, I meant to put it in my small notebook, but I did put it in a big notebook, and I'm happy that I did that because it's actually going to turn out a little bit better. So here is that gray one, and this is representing that purple diamond that surrounds it. So what's going to happen is that there's going to be force that is going to be pushed out in all directions. The purple spots or the helixes are going to counteract that. So if these are pushing out and up, the helixes are going to counterbalance that and put pressure in and down, the equal and opposite reaction of what's going on inside. So what is that going to do? It's going to dissipate and equalize the stress and pressure of that whole structure, especially when it comes in and more pressure is going to be placed on the dome areas up here. We'll actually explore dome relationships later when we get into toroidal fields, but for now I'm just going to mention if we can take this idea into the 3D, you can actually see them in neural networks, you can see them in water patterns, and even in structures in the galaxies and in space where you have voids and the filament patterns. Just know that there's that special push, pull, and supportive structure in that. I'm going to share one more story, some disclaimers, and an extra idea here before we end the video, because I think it's going to be way too long and it's going to be better if I just spread out some of these ideas. So anyway, when I was doing the work on 8-pointed stars, this 6-pointed star jumped right out at me. So I don't know if it's correct in the organization that I'm going to mention, but so anyway, it is the combination of the first harmonic and the second harmonic here. The first harmonic here is a 90-degree triangle, which is the Pythagorean triangle, and then the second harmonic here is a equilateral triangle where all the angles are 60. Now the combination of these, so if you go and take this and connect the dots here and connect it here and here, you're going to come out with a pentagram or a traditional 5-pointed star. Now if you're interested in something like this, this goes beyond, way beyond the scope of this video, but if you like it and want more ideas about it, there is Ken Wheeler's channel. He does an excellent job with Pythagorean triangles, pentagrams, and the geometry of life. I've only seen, I've seen a lot of his videos, but I am looking forward to his books too. But that is an excellent source if you're looking for something like that. So anyway, let's grow this idea. And so what I saw in this 6-pointed star is this. So I saw the square and the compass of the Masons here. So now let's grow this one more time. So here is my disclaimer and my story. So honestly, I don't know anything about the Masonic lodges or anything like that. All I know is that way back in the day, my grandfather was a cement hauler and a brick mason, so he did join his local lodge, and my grandmother did join the women's organization, the Eastern Stars. Well, since then and since his passing, I tend to support the Masons if I see them out and about and fundraising for whatever projects they might be fundraising for. So this particular day, they were selling calendars, and I went up to one of the Masons and I said, "Well, what is this G in the middle of your symbol?" And he looked at me like I was crazy, like he just rolled his eyes, and then when he stopped, he was like, "Are you serious? You seriously don't know what that means?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what that means. That's why I'm asking it. I really don't know what it means." And he said, "Well, it's God." And then he shoves my calendar basically into my chest and walks away. But you know what? That's okay, because I really didn't know, and now I know. But with a little bit of digging, of course, that's one interpretation. But some people could say that it is it means geometry or the generative principle, and of course that Mason says it's God. So anyway, it could be all of it. It could be analogous one for the other. You know, it just depends. So anyway, but we are going to explore the generative principle in our next video on magnetism. So I hope you join me then. I hope you enjoy these videos, and we'll see each other next time. Stay magical, everybody. All right, bye.